Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank you for participating in Battelle's functional food research this afternoon. The lunch that you just had, if you had the chocolate cake, has a new drug we just developed injected into it. And if any of you fall asleep during my conversation this afternoon, it's no reflection on my speech, it's the functional food product. So I'm Simon Tripp. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not from Ohio. In fact, I don't even live in Ohio now. I'm based in Pittsburgh, but I'm from London originally, but lived in the States for 20 years, did my graduate work here in the US. So let's talk first about what is Battelle, or who is Battelle? Now, when I'm talking to audiences in other parts of the country, I'm surprised that a lot of people never heard of Battelle. And actually, when I was doing the project here at Ohio State, I found people who hadn't heard of Battelle. So I'll take a couple of minutes just to tell you who we are. Battelle is actually the world's largest non-profit R&D organization. Last year, I think our revenues were $4.6 billion. We're a global leader in the development and commercialization and transfer of technology. So we're predominantly about applied science and R&D activity. We do a lot of contract research with industry, but certainly our biggest client is the United States federal government, and we manage several of the large Department of Energy research laboratories around the country. We have over 20,000 employees, and I think about 4,500, 5,000 or so here in the Columbus area. Within Battelle, so most of the Battelle employees would be scientists and engineers, but within Battelle we have a group that I co-lead that specializes in looking at science and technology from an economic development perspective. So in what we call the knowledge-driven economy that the United States now finds itself in, clearly research and development and technology are key drivers of economic development. And so Battelle has a tremendous amount of experience working across the country. For some reason, we've not been working in Texas, but I guess we won't, since they apparently don't want to be part of the United States anymore. So we'll have to put that into our international group. Our areas of expertise, we do a lot of work in core competency evaluation, figuring out what a place is really good at, and then looking at how what they're good at intersects with market opportunity to produce potential economic development activities. Going back to what Bill said, yes, working with OARDCs resulted in pretty good work for us around the country, because the work that we did for you folks did get quite a bit of attention. And following on from working here, we went straight across to the University of Nebraska. We've done work at Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and Northern Arizona in the Flagstaff area. We just finished a big project in North Carolina. And we're currently doing a pretty interesting project across 5 states in the southern United States, where we're trying to figure out all the different biomass that they can produce, what will grow there, what are the crop residues that are left behind, and trying to produce a bio-based strategy that will also look at their existing industrial infrastructure and ways to reuse that industrial infrastructure using bio-based feedstocks instead of petrochemicals. So lots of pretty interesting and current projects taking place. With OARDC, as we've said, we've had a pretty long track record of working with you guys. Started back in October 2003, at least my relationship with OARDC did, measuring economic impact, followed on by doing a competitive positioning strategy. And then we've continued with products following on from that, and then this time we're doing an update. So for the project that we call the 2004 to 2008 update project, we really had 3 predominant tasks: to highlight program accomplishments, what's occurred since we did that 2003 study, to look at the technologies and core competencies within OARDC and see what that suggests to us in terms of signature focus areas, both current and emerging, and then to update the strategy that we had developed for OARDC based upon those findings and conclusions. One thing that I think's been a major change, not necessarily just within OSU, but globally, and certainly on the national and state stage, has been the rise since 2003 of Agbiosciences as a really dominant force in the economy. When we started our work back in 2003, we had to explain to people the importance of agriculture and agbiosciences. At that time, we had a person who will remain nameless in the state government here who had come out and publicly said that agriculture is a 19th century activity, let alone a 21st century activity, and why should we be concerned about that? And we all took sort of a gasp and stepped back from that and so wait a minute, nothing's more relevant. We're in a bio-driven economy. And too many people had only thought that a bio-driven economy meant biomedical products. They seem to forget this huge sphere of plant and animal related biomass in our ecosystems that represented tremendous opportunity for further development. And clearly agriculture is one of the most scientifically driven disciplines that you could ever find. We no longer have to make that explanation. It's certainly well known around the country, it's well known within the state of Ohio, and it's resulted in more support for OARDC. Now, part of that recognition has obviously come with the global food crisis, with the rise in energy prices and the resulting interest in biomass-based products. I put a question mark at the end of that last one here in terms of within the university recognition, because I think in some regards one of the last places it seemed to really get it was Ohio State University, that the College of Agriculture was not perhaps as well recognized across the institution in terms of the opportunities that were presented by Agbioscience to other people in other disciplines across the campus. And that's now really shifting, and I think you could see that in the presentations given earlier and the conversation by Dr. Whitaker. This is similar to the slide Bobby showed earlier. I think there's not a single area of science that is more relevant to the most pressing issues in the global environment than agricultural biosciences are today. Global food production and security, biosecurity and emerging diseases, renewable energy, climate change, environmental sustainability and quality of life, human health and nutrition. All of these are obviously areas in which agbiosciences and the individual disciplines that make up the agbiosciences are critically important. Now within Ohio, of course, what we find is that there's only one college that is structured to address each of those global priorities. That's the College of Food, Agriculture and Environmental Sciences here at OSU. It's also the only college within the whole state, so it's the only college within the university, and then the university is really the main player. 95% of all ag biosciences research taking place in Ohio, academically funded academic research, takes place within OARDC and Ohio State University. So you're the 500-pound gorilla in the Ohio economy when it comes to what's likely to be one of the preeminent drivers of the Ohio economy moving forward. So you're incredibly important to the future of Ohio. The theme of interdisciplinary has come up often in the conversations today, and we've been using this diagram to sort of explain the global bioeconomy and the biosciences opportunity that exists. There's really four spheres of biotechnology that people tend to talk about. Red biotechnology, which is the medical arena. Grey biotechnology, which is industrial. Green biotechnology, which is the agricultural and environmental biotech. And blue biotechnology, which is marine biotechnology. And the opportunities in those areas for interactions across disciplines are huge. Just look at the intersections on the Venn diagram, and I think you can get a real feel for some of these opportunities. Areas such as biofarming, the production of drugs and pharmaceuticals through plant pathways, fibers and materials in industrial biotechnology and crop agriculture, and of course the whole area of bio-based products and biofuels is another niche area, and increasingly algae as well, where marine biosciences and agricultural biosciences and biomass production are intersecting. As I said, the opportunities for ag bioscience-based economic development really did raise recognition when we did the work back in 2003. It certainly wasn't Battelle's work alone that did that. You've had a long history here with Dr. Sporleder, who I know is going to be on the panel, in terms of raising the profile of the food industry and the agricultural vertically integrated food chain in the state in terms of its overall multi-million-dollar, actually multi-billion-dollar economic impact on the state of Ohio. And then we did work following on to that just specifically to look at the impacts of OARDC, and then we also did a work to point out the importance of extension as well. We also did core competency assessment, profiling the platforms. And in the 2003 study, we identified these 7 primary areas as main platforms for R&D-based economic development opportunity and further science development in Ohio. Those are shown on this diagram, which really sort of shows how we ended up deriving those 3 signature focus areas. At that time in 2004, 2003, we called them the Food Economy Collaboratory, the Bio-Based Economy Collaboratory, and Environmental Economy Collaboratory. And at that time, you had all of these different areas of focus that fed into those. And those have only been improved and made more robust over the past 4 years. Coming out of those 2004 recommendations, we specifically made recommendations for activities regarding the need to enhance interdisciplinary research to make those platforms work, to make them a focus for industry interaction and collaborative projects. That it wasn't just a case of getting researchers to researchers within the university working together, but getting industry engaged in some of these issues and problems obviously helps to accelerate the work on pragmatic problems that are of interest to industry and therefore more rapidly commercializable. We also emphasized the need to be involved in proactive technology evaluation and market assessment, that faculty members can be experts in developing a new technology or making a scientific discovery, but it doesn't mean you're experts in evaluating the market for products that may result from that. And often you need that professional assistance to really see whether there's a good commercial opportunity. And then support for faculty involved in commercialization activities. What we find looking back over that time period is that OARDC has been very proactive in adopting the type of structure that we recommended. The 3-platform model, as Bobby showed in his talk early this morning, certainly reflects that. You made the effort to form multidisciplinary centers with the Agbioscience Centers of Innovation, slotted into the university targeted investments in excellence so that it becomes not just interdisciplinary within the college but across the entire university. And there have been multiple cross-cutting R&D and commercialization supports developed. We can see on this diagram, it's probably pretty hard for you guys to read in the back, but basically it's showing those 3 signature focus areas across the top that exist now: food security, production and human health, advanced bioenergy and bio-based products, and environmental quality and sustainability. And you can see that under those, the Agbioscience Centers of Innovation that have been formed fit very neatly. The Center for Diagnostic Assays, Advanced Functional Food Research and Entrepreneurship, and Food Safety and Agricultural Security, obviously under that food security, production and human health sphere. The multifunctional plant Germplasm, which is an integral component of OBIC, the Ohio Bioproducts Innovation Center, certainly within the bioenergy and bio-based product sphere, and Center for Urban Environment and Economic Development in the environmental quality and sustainability sphere. And the university tie programs, 4 of those certainly slot very neatly into the initiatives. And one thing I should point out is that this one of the centers that was talked about in terms of being developed earlier that Carol brought up, the one related to clean energy. If I were to look to that and I look at the characteristics of the Ohio economy, if you look at US Department of Energy data on renewable energy resources available across the country, Ohio does not have good opportunities in wind power. You don't have the sustained winds. You don't have geothermal. You don't have the solar load for solar technologies to the degree probably needed to make it a key energy source. The one resource that you do have in renewable energy is likely to be biomass. And it's the College of Agriculture that's going to be the leader in clean energy-related solutions based on Ohio-based generation of those technologies. There's also been cross-cutting R&D support. Dave Benfield earlier talked about the SEEDS initiative and the important role it's played in providing funding for early-stage and new researcher programs. And then infrastructure investments too. Obviously science, good science, whether it's basic science or translational science, doesn't occur without the infrastructure needed to support that. So the growth of the Molecular and Cellular Imaging Center, the new bioenergy research facility, the upcoming biocontainment facility, the BSL-3 facility, are all important components in propelling forward the work in these platforms. And finally, cross-cutting commercialization and economic development support. One of those is one of the Agbioscience Centers of Innovation, which very shrewdly was designed, the Center for Innovation-Based Enterprise, to work across those different other centers and indeed across other areas of the university and the College of Agriculture to provide commercialization support, market assessment, those things we talked about earlier as being critically important, that being led out of the Department of Agricultural Economics, Development Economics. And then there's also been the supporting programs of ATEC, the BioHire Research Park, a component of ATEC. And of course, you shouldn't discount the great importance of extension in terms of taking the discoveries that take place here and translating those rapidly into the application and use of those technologies within the Ohio production environment. And then the college itself, one of the critically important factors in modern knowledge-driven economic development, obviously, is the transfer of that knowledge through education to the next generation. And so the education mission of the university is also critically important to economic development in Agbiosciences. One of the things we look for when we're examining places around the country in terms of their readiness for technology-driven economic development are all the links in the development chain in place and being supported to make development happen. And this diagram sort of simplistically illustrates those links. Certainly for a science-driven economic development component, basic science is critically important. And while we certainly like to see work focused into platforms when it starts to move down the applied route, certainly what we've never proposed within the institution is that the sort of freedom of basic sciences and the pursuit of wacky ideas be discounted. That's obviously the key driver of many of the discoveries that do take place within university, and that basic science component is absolutely critically important, as is applied R&D. We've seen that when you look at NIH funding, for example, in the biomedical sphere. One of the big shifts that's occurred in NIH funding has been a moderate move away from basic science research and into translational research. That what had happened is the basic sciences had created this huge pent-up base of knowledge, but it was not being translated through clinical trials and applied research into feasible products and technologies for actual use in the marketplace. When you move into a lot of biological-based products, piloting becomes important. Obviously, many of you know that what works on your benchtop as research scientists doesn't necessarily translate in terms of scaling up into a commercial-based technology, whether it's economic or not. And certainly in bio-based products and biofuels, that's one of the issues. And so the piloting and demonstration work taking place within the energy facility out at Worcester is going to be very important, as are the piloting facilities in food science here on the campus in Columbus. And then, of course, you've got to get that technology out of that feasibility stage and that proof of concept stage and out into application within the commercial realm, which needs technology transfer, which then needs all the different things that Ohio State shouldn't be thinking about on its own, but should be working with the state, and indeed does work with the state and with the community here and in Worcester in terms of capital availability, facilities for new businesses to start up, all of those different activities. What we find when we look at what's happened over the last 5 years here at OSU is that indeed many programs have been put in place or have been continued to operate, because some of these existed prior to 2003, that do indeed provide those supports across that entire development chain. The seeds research grants and the basic science and applied R&D side, as with the Agbioscience Centers of Innovation, the target investments in excellence, but also moving through in terms of support for piloting, technology transfer and commercialization of technologies through these many other initiatives. Bobby showed this diagram, and it was simply, the version he showed was sort of didn't have all this text in the middle. This is simply highlighting the research component of that 3 signature focus area platform and the ways in which all of these different centers, both the new ones that were created since 2003 and some of the existing initiatives that have existed over time within OARDC, as well as third frontier investments from the state, all fit within that platform structure. Now, one of the things that occurred between 2003 and today, there has been a major change. I mentioned that there's been a sort of growth in prominence of agbiosciences and an increased awareness nationally and on a state level as to its importance. But also the actual agbiosciences environment has changed quite considerably over those 5 years. Back in 2003, one of the main economic impacts we were able to point to was a tremendous amount of soybean varieties, for example, grown in Ohio that were from Ohio-developed germplasm, and we could show the improved yield of those products versus competing seed and able to show hundreds of millions of dollars worth of impact. That market shifted somewhat. Clearly, the growth of Roundup-ready proprietary varieties of seed impacted the market significantly, but as we'll talk about in a little while, we're seeing that starting to swing back the other way now, with advanced functional traits starting to push development back into university-related labs when it comes to plant technology. Energy markets, obviously the huge rise in global energy prices that occurred just accelerated attention to renewable development extremely quickly. It resulted in rising input costs, of course, with fertilizers being petrochemical based. Farmers saw their commodity crop prices soar. We've seen the rise and fall of corn-based ethanol in some parts of the country. I was just down in the Mississippi Delta region working on the project I'm doing there, and most of the biodiesel plants that formed there in the last 2 years are already being shut down and mothballed because the price of the feedstock's too high for them to be able to compete. So it's a very volatile marketplace that we're having to figure our way through. There's obviously increased attention to global climate change, and the Bush administration finally actually came out and said, oh, I think it does exist after all. So that's been positive and obviously led here by the work at the Byrd Polar Center. The increased federal deficit, though, of course, pushing funding challenges down across institutions, and indeed the state deficits that are occurring across the country. You're certainly not alone as a state-funded higher education institution in terms of receiving significant budget cuts. University of Tennessee, where I'm working at the moment, was seeing 30% budget cuts for some of their departments, so it's a pretty significant issue. So all of that results in you operating within a changing environment that's occurred over that time period. I'm going to talk now about two things. First, I'm going to talk about economic impact, then I'm going to swing over to discuss core competencies and where we see your real research strengths currently. In terms of economic impact, you impact the state in multiple ways, but you could divide those into two basic concepts. One type is what economists call backward linkage impacts, and typically when you see an economic impact study announced, and the economic impact study of this hospital on the community is X dollars, it's a backward linkage study, and what it's measuring are the direct institutional expenditures in that economy for goods and services, for labor, for utilities and construction, and then the extent to which those original direct expenditures recirculate within your local economy until ultimately they leak out. It's an important story to tell, but it's not the most important. Any institution that has a footprint in a community and spends money has a backward linkage economic impact. That's not the primary reason why Ohio State University is here. The real story comes in terms of forward linkages, the actual impacts of what you do as opposed to simply your expenditures. And it's here you see a range of exciting impacts in terms of new knowledge and innovations generated, the diffusion of that knowledge and best practices into the community to improve production, to improve producer knowledge and know-how, technologies that enhance agricultural yields and quality, new and improved products for business, enhance sustainability of the Ohio economy, reduce negative impacts, and that's one of the things we should talk about, that economic impact is not just in terms of new economic activity generated, it can also be looked at in terms of negative effects on the economy that are offset. So if you develop a solution to soybean rust, you create a major economic impact in the community because you stop the losses of that crop through that pathogen. Enhanced health and wellness and quality of life through functional food products, through nutrition activities, and then through environmental health as well. And ultimately, economic growth and security. So through those two pathways, backward linkage and forward linkages, you're a fundamental engine for creating economic output in the local economy, and in the state economy, and in the national economy, in terms of creating jobs within Ohio, in terms of personal income, and generating government revenue at the local and state and federal levels. When we look at your institutional spending, the backward linkages, so as an operating entity, irrespective of the R&D mission and your discoveries, you generate these impacts in the local economy through spending. And for 2008, we use input-output methodology. We don't have to get into the details of that, but it's the same that Dr. Sporleder uses as input-output analysis in his Ohio food model. We find $156.3 million in total Ohio economic output, both direct and multiplied, being generated by your expenditures in the Ohio economy. Over 1,600 jobs generated and almost 60 million in personal income generated for Ohioans just because of the operations of OARDC. And this simply breaks that down into direct and indirect impacts of OARDC, and of course part of the funding for OARDC research comes through the OSERF pathway, so we measured that as well, and together those give the combined impact. All right, the more interesting story, I think, the forward impacts. It's the innovation resulting from your R&D that powers those impacts. Functional impacts are generated by your activities through your research mission and also through your education mission and your extension and outreach mission. Comes in many ways. Research finding, publications and innovations. Dr. Whitaker was pointing out the number of publications from some of the research initiatives across campus. It's hard to put a dollar value on that knowledge diffusion because somebody's idea that may be generated today might lead to a fundamental, in basic sciences, might lead to a fundamental applied commercial product 15 years from now. And it's pretty hard to trace back the lineage to put hard dollar numbers on that. But certainly publishing is an important economic stimulus and engine. So research findings, publications, and innovations related to that. The diffusion of that innovation, of course, and one of the things that many other areas of academe struggle to do is to diffuse knowledge into practice. Clearly agricultural sciences has long known how to do because it's had extension in support of its activities. You were purposely designed. In fact, the foundation of Ohio State University in the first place as a land-grant institution was to generate knowledge and diffuse that knowledge to improve agricultural practice in the state of Ohio. There's intellectual property generation, and that has value. As was discussed earlier, just the feline virus vaccine work has resulted in many millions of dollars coming back to the university. And increasingly in a knowledge-driven economy, intellectual property is perhaps one of the most valuable properties that you could hold. And then out of that, technology commercialization, the formation of new companies, and business growth stemming from that. So there's three main pathways to agbioscience-based economic development. There's the research and development activity itself, and certainly a lot of that funding, as we saw earlier in some of the graphics shown, a lot of that funding comes from the federal government. So it's money coming into the economy, and the research enterprise itself is an important employer and an important generator of jobs and income. There's technology commercialization, and there's enhanced productivity and value added for existing industry through new products, through enhanced production technologies, technology-based solutions to industry problems, and all of the economic output that results from that. So what we see is that you've formed within this structure over the last 4 years a pretty robust system for moving forward in taking ag biosciences and enhancing its forward linkage economic impacts on the state of Ohio. One of the ways you've been doing that is through the Ag Bioscience Centers of Innovation program. That's a program that was specifically designed to support the formation of programs and centers focused on specific industry problems, issues, and commercializable technologies. We hope that ideally it would be built upon existing areas of OARDC research core competency, and that is what has been done, that it would target practical and commercializable solutions, and the industry would be actively engaged in the process with those centers, providing advice and providing partnerships on the initiatives and work taking place within those centers. As we saw, 6 ABEG centers have been formed. 5 of them are sort of scientific research based, and one of them very important cross-cutting support mechanism, although it also does research on innovation and enterprise formation that's publishable as well. One of these is the Center for Diagnostic Assays, bringing reagents and diagnostic assays to market. Already molecular-based assays come through the pipeline and many more in development. And one of the things we tried to do in the impact report is put some numbers to some of the areas that these innovations have an impact upon. We recently did a great deal of work on the economic impact of the livestock industry in the state of Ohio. And one of the things we found was that poultry and egg production in Ohio, it's a total of $861 million industry in the state and generates over 8,700 jobs. But of course, as a biological-based industry and as based on live organisms, infectious diseases pose a significant threat to that industry. Infectious bursal disease virus, did I say that right, Darryl? Thank you. And very virulent, that's one's even tougher to say, IBDV, have certainly been a significant global threat to the poultry industry. But the rapid assay development that's taken place through researchers affiliated with the center have been an important step in terms of providing early warning of outbreaks of those viruses and helping to offset the negative economic impacts that could result. The other area, of course, that Ohio State's had a long-established, strong reputation in is in livestock diseases in general. We find that USDA statistics, when we looked at them, indicated food animal diseases reduce annual livestock revenues in the United States by 1.8%. If you extrapolate that across Ohio, animal disease outbreaks cause around 65 million in total output lost in the Ohio economy on an annual basis. So the work taking place specifically to develop diagnostics, to develop solutions to animal diseases has a significant impact on the benefits to the Ohio economy here. When we looked at the Ohio livestock sector total on the economy in Ohio, we see $3.6 billion in Ohio economic output, over 45,000 jobs dependent on that livestock industry in Ohio. So as I said earlier, to that enhanced productivity and value added for existing industry also has to be added the protection against losses that can be associated with negative events. The Center for Advanced Functional Food Research and Entrepreneurship, here I think that's one of those tremendous multidisciplinary areas where there's one of those big overlaps between the red biotech and the green biotech fields. Development of foods with application to chronic diseases, discovery, development, testing, trials, and market analysis. I figure most of you in this audience are probably familiar with what functional foods means, but I think the simplest definition is that it's a food product that has health benefits beyond the basic nutritional value of that food. The return, I think, that you can see from some of these big center investments is pretty significant. The original university investment in Caffrey was $300,000. There's been a total of $20.4 million in projects funded through that center, and there's currently 14 million active, or at least at last year when we're completing this study. So tremendous leverage of that original investment and strong company relationships with big name companies such as Coke, Nestle, Wyeth, and adding value to an industry that Dr. Sporleader's research showed has a $11.1 billion gross state product. Good intellectual property being generated as well through the center in tomato-based food products enriched with soy-based isoflavones, as we saw in that earlier slide. Oral gels to try and reduce the incidence of oral cancers using black raspberry-based products, fruit juice and soy-based confections, and a number of different patent-pending technologies being developed through the center. The Center for Food Safety and Agro-Security, leveraging OSU microbiology, pathogen technologies, and developing packaging to preserve foods and prevent infection. We talked earlier about the ozone pasteurization technology for eggs, but also work in tamper-evident packaging and rapid diagnostic tests. If you just looked at microbial pathogen contamination of food annually in the United States, the estimates are staggering. 76 million illnesses caused by food, pathogens. 325,000 hospitalizations and 5,000 deaths. So the work taking place within this centre to reduce those negative impacts is exceptionally important. If we just looked at the Safeguarding Ohio eggs, as Dr. Whitaker mentioned, Ohio ranked second in the nation. It produces a staggering 7.5 billion eggs annually, worth $279 million. Supports over 5,300 Ohio jobs. If you just looked at salmonellosis as a disease, on a cost basis, you got between $331 and $1,600 per case. There were different methodologies used to derive those two different numbers. So if we looked at a situation where you could eradicate salmonellosis within the Ohio environment, you could save between $9.3 and $46 million in healthcare-related costs directly through the reduction of those diseases. There's the Center for Urban Environment and Economic Development. It's very much oriented towards supporting Ohio's green industry. The green sector in Ohio is large. It's over 6,600 establishments, 66,000 people working within the green industry in the state. And it's also been a fast growth sector of the economy. It's grown 28% from 1990 through 2005, when the overall Ohio private sector grew only at 11.2%, so more than double the private sector growth rate. And Ohio rates fifth in the green industry. What the Center for Urban Environment and Economic Development has been doing is a number of novel products being developed, particularly organic-related products for fertilization and for inoculation, and also for the delivery of pest control agents such as nematodes. OBIC. OBIC's a real third frontier initiative success story, the Ohio Bioproducts Innovation Center. And within that center, OARDC has been playing a very important role leveraging your expertise in plant sciences, genetics. The development and production of plant biomass is being done in terms of developing biomass, plant-based products that are optimized for downstream processing characteristics, either in terms of their morphology or in terms of their phytochemical content. And working on value-added traits through plant pathways in terms of proteins, sugars, fatty acids, esters, starch, gluten, and other applications. I mentioned earlier that one of the issues impacting Ohio State University's overall economic impact on agbiosciences in the state had been that swing away from crop specialization, which had certainly favored high impacts from OSU plant variety development in the 90s and early 2000s, because soybeans needed and other crops needed to be customized to be best optimized for the Ohio growing environment, and that was largely done through OARDC. But then the prevalence of Roundup Ready varieties sort of came into play and reduced that impact somewhat. But I think as you start to see the interest of high value-added agriculture in the state and in the United States in general, the need to put specialized traits in and develop specialized crops for specific industries, it's going to swing back, and you're going to see increasing importance of plant variety development and transgenic species through OSU pathways. There's been a lot of ongoing IP generation. Soybean varieties, maize inbred lines, just this one example of Denison versus Cotman in terms of soybean varieties. The trials have shown a 6.1 bushel increase per acre. Cotman was grown on 30,000 acres, so if you got that 6.1 bushel increase per acre by switching over to Denison, based on sort of prevailing soybean prices last year, just on those 30,000 acres, you've got up to $5 million in positive economic impact from that one discovery for Ohio farmers. I won't dwell too much on this natural rubber opportunity. It's a great example, though, of a complete supply chain opportunity of taking the farmer and the land resources of the state, introducing a new crop optimized for the Ohio growing environment through OARDC work, work in terms of how to cultivate that plant, harvest that plant, to result in support of an existing highly important industry for a major part of the state. There's over 247 Ohio companies that are dependent on natural rubber as a prime component of their manufactured products. And the estimate for a Russian dandelion-based rubber industry is that it would have $130 million in direct economic impact on the state of Ohio and create 165 jobs. The Center for Innovation-Based Enterprise is the cross-cutting support mechanism. And you can see in that blue box on the right some of the important initiatives that they've been engaged in supporting commercialization activity across the other center activities. We've mentioned OARDC's increasing participation in the targeted investments in excellence, the importance in climate, water and carbon area, public health preparedness, energy and sustainability in the environment, and translational plant sciences. The other thing to point out too is the Ohio Department of Development has its 9 targeted areas of priority that they've placed on the Ohio economy based on their analysis, and actually we supported them in some of that analysis, in terms of which are the priority sectors for Ohio moving forward. And you can see that OARDC and the work that you do has a direct linkage and support for 4 of those priority sectors: ag and food processing, biosciences and bioproducts, advanced energy and environmental technologies, and polymers and advanced materials. But you actually support all of those other areas: distribution and logistics. Certainly biomass distribution and logistics is going to be critical to the economics of a bio-based economy. When you get into precision agriculture or diagnostic tools and tests and instruments that come from that, instruments, controls and electronics, motor vehicle and parts manufacturing and aerospace and aviation, bio-based products and recyclability are a key issue in those also. And corporate and professional services with a base of actual agricultural consulting firms here in Ohio there as well. In terms of OBIC and Third Frontier initiatives, OARDC is playing an important role in a number of those: advanced granule technologies, working with the Andersons on a pelletization technology, advanced crop development for bio-based industrial product applications, alternative feedstocks development, and bio-based polymer development. The biomass to energy program is critically important. As I mentioned earlier, when you look at the resources available in Ohio for renewable-based technologies, it's largely going to be biomass-driven. This has already received Third Frontier support. It's doing work predominantly to begin with on low-value waste streams, which I think makes a great deal of sense. I don't think too much bioenergy production in the long run is going to be coming from primary crops. It'll come from crop residues and waste streams, more likely from lignocellulosic materials. The economic opportunity out of that sector, of course, is very important in terms of developing new value-added products for farmers, creating value from low-value waste streams, and for achieving cost efficiencies for industry through generation of electricity through their waste streams as well. Sorry, let me go back. One of the unique characteristics, okay, can't show it, the graphic's not coming up. What I had on this graphic that's not there was a diagram illustrating the multiple ways in which this new bio-based economy is networked. That when you looked at, actually, can you X out of the presentation a second and just bring up that slide? Because it's an important point to try and make. All right, that's not going to come up. Go back to the slide, thanks. It is in the report, so go online, get the report, and you'll be able to see the point that we were trying to make. But basically that a systems approach is needed to the economics of a lot of these products, that a waste stream alone isn't an economic product. You have to have a system of realizing value from that waste stream and creating value-added products from it, and then using the co-products from that to feed another value-added process stream. And that it takes an institution like a university to be able to take the holistic approach to looking at the overall economic system, an agronomic and biomass system, that's needed to operate within that. The individual companies cannot do it. It takes a university and the multidisciplinary approaches that you guys have to make that work. This slide simply highlighted some of the different ATEC and BioHio Research Park initiatives that you're doing. So what we see with these systems that you've developed is that you've developed a system really designed to enhance economic impacts of OARDC on the Ohio economy, and that you're working across the full suite of those chains. I want to now talk briefly, to the extent that I've ever talked briefly, in terms of core competencies of OARDC. When we do a core competency assessment, we do pretty detailed quantitative analysis to determine where the strengths lie. We obviously look at what's been happening in terms of research funding and where that research funding's been going. We look at USI statistics on publications and citations, so faculty productivity in different areas of science. We have a proprietary tool that Battelle developed out of Pacific Northwest National Labs that lets us mine text for relationships and find clusters of activity that we applied to patents in the state, to your research grants, and we even took each of your faculty CVs and ran them through the model to see where there were faculty who might have relationships and could be working together. We look at invention disclosures and IP generation, and we also do pretty exhaustive interviews of faculty and department chairs. Just in terms of the composition of funding here, nationally agricultural sciences receive about 5.9% of total R&D funding. It's obviously a land-grant university. Agricultural sciences takes a bigger chunk here at OSU. You're equivalent to 8%. But of course, a certain amount of the work taking place in biological sciences, in veterinary medicine, and in other areas are certainly agricultural related. So it's significantly beyond 8% of OSU funding relevant to the type of work that we're talking about. Growth of agricultural R&D, if we run a trend line for OSU versus the nation, it's certainly been more jagged at OSU, but the trend's been generally more favorable in terms of a steeper trend line for OSU funding in Agbiosciences versus the nation. One of the things I think this graphic shows is sort of a shift in the emphasis of the type of funding. The blue bar is federal, the green bar is non-federal. And I think you can see here that shift taking place from 2005 through 2008 in terms of the total volume of research funding being fairly stable. I think faculty are probably operating at sort of a maximum productivity level. But the shift has occurred in terms of the emphasis of the type of funding, that there's a lot more corporate funding and a lot more state funding through the Third Frontier initiatives coming in on this pragmatic and applied research application of the work that you've done. This, you're going to have to go online and into the report to make any real sense of this. This is the output of the Starlight cluster analysis that we do, the OmniVis analysis. And it's taking the text of grants, in this case 610 individual grants and publications, and clustering those based on who seems to be working in similar areas, and then we can then go in and see where it looks like you have particular strengths. These are the cluster terms that resulted from that. I mentioned that we also did that on people's, that didn't import very well, on your individual faculty CVs to see where you were highlighting your expertise and provide OARDC then with a tool that they can go into and mine in terms of putting together potential partnerships, so that when somebody comes across from, say, the College of Medicine with a concept, that you have a good detailed now tool for going in and finding which faculty members fit to those specific terms in terms of their expertise in different areas. And this actually lists faculty names by these individual metaclusters that developed out of that analysis. In terms of pulling together an overview then of core competencies, we look at the grants, awards and publications, the cluster analysis results, and a number of other variables going into it to form an overall picture of where we see your strengths being. The 2003 core competencies are in those blue, light blue cells on the left. We saw your strengths back then being in breeding and genetics of food animals, food animal infectious diseases, food safety, food processing and preservation technology, environmental protection and sustainability, breeding, genetics and protection of crop plants, and breeding and genetics of ornamental plants. That's expanded somewhat when we look through the strengths of the institution now. I think in a couple of cases we maybe missed some strengths the first time around that have always been there. I mean, the economics of Agbiosciences, agricultural economics is a strength of this institution and long-established strength. And some of those strengths, of course, have continued through into these new 2008 core competencies that we outline in far more detail within the report. We see those 10 core research competencies sort of segmenting themselves naturally into 5 main platforms and 1 cross-cutting support platform. Those platforms being food crop and food animal production and protection, post-harvest food systems, non-food crop genetics and breeding, and that's next to the bioenergy and bio-based products cell for quite a logical reason. Obviously, it's the upstream production of biomass customized to feed into that bioenergy and bio-based product sphere. And then an important environmental protection and sustainability and development. And then cross-cutting support across all of those that comes through the economics of Agbiosciences support pathways. I'm not going to go, I think we're probably running late on time. We're going to need to get the panel up here to talk. So I'm not going to go through in detail each of these individual platforms, but we do outline in the report in quite a bit of detail where we see the opportunities lying, the specific OSU and OARDC strengths, the prospects for external funding, and we have pretty detailed discussions of competition as well and the market sizes for products and services coming out of these technology platforms. This slide simply shows some of the product categories under each of those 6 main areas that look to us to have significant opportunity. And this slide summarizes those 6 2008 platforms, shows where they fit within those 3 signature focus areas for the university and the college, and where the original 2004 strengths fit within those as well. So overall, we certainly see significant progress having taken place at this institution over a relatively short time period. One of the things we've noted around the country is that universities are not the fastest moving organizations, but actually OARDC has been one of the faster moving organizations in academia in terms of reacting to the importance of the bio-based economy and trying to formulate its programs and structure initiatives and supports to take advantage of those opportunities. Is it perfect? No. There's areas that can be improved, and we've specified those within the report, but it really has been tremendous strides, and the impacts that you currently have are very important, but I think the impacts moving forward for the Ohio economy and the national economy, and indeed the global economy, through the types of initiatives that you're working on. I hope you've sort of got the feedback today, both from me and from the other speakers, that this is it really is a case where you can say now is your time. What Bobby Moser talked about this morning, and it's rare moments in time when scientific opportunity, global issues, and market opportunities all come together to favor a single suite of disciplines. And Agbiosciences in the 21st century economy are going to be the key driver of economic growth and development in a modern developed economy. You guys have a very, very important role to play in that. I think that's going to be helped by the fact that over that 5-year time period, we've seen a significant growth in the recognition of that opportunity, not just within the university community, but within the corporate community across the state and within the government community, both statewide and on a federal level. So exciting time for all of you to be involved in biosciences, an exciting time to be in consulting around biosciences the way I am. Thank you.